Welcome, everyone. For those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Bruce McFarlane. I am the CEO of BDC Partners, and I'm also a principal at BDC Law. So welcome, everyone. We have Dave Lindsay and Luke Woods as our presenters today. So Dave is the CEO of BDC Franchise Recruitment and also the founder of Hatch, which we didn't put up there. Welcome, Dave. And Luke is the founder and CEO of Books 365. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanking you.
Oh, there we go. Should have put your pictures up. You can see everyone can see who you are. For those of you who haven't been to one of our BDC webinars before, BDC Group is a number of different businesses. So part of the BDC network, we have BDC Recruitment, BDC Property, BDC Law, and BDC Performance, which are all businesses we operate to support franchisors and retailers. We also have what we call the BDC Collective. So we have a number of businesses that we work really closely with, which you can see there: Associated Projects, Hatch, Gap Map, 6 Point for accounting, Books 365, Little Giant Finance, and Benjamin. We also have our investment businesses. So we part own soon to be 5 investment businesses. So Bubba Pizza, Sinewave, Computer Explorers, House of Golf, and Freshfront. And as I was saying earlier, for those on there, 4 of those will be at the Franchising Expo on the weekend. So Dave and I will be wearing shirts with lots of brands on them too. Today, again, for those of you who've been part of these before, we'd like to make them interactive. But for those who aren't there, we'd love to, if you want to turn, this says turn your camera off, turn your cameras on. If you've got a question, raise your hand, because we'd like to hear from all of you. There's lots of experience amongst all of you. So it's not just about Dave and Luke presenting. We'd like to make it interactive as possible. So happy for your questions. And the topics today that we're covering are predominantly around franchise recruitment and benchmarking, and how benchmarking flows into the recruitment process. So I might start with you, Luke. Are you going to talk a little bit about benchmarking to start with?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, most of you probably know what benchmarking is, but I suppose it's essentially the ability for a franchise network to report its numbers against itself. And so creating those figures of what makes a successful franchisee in your franchising network, and obviously being able to compare a franchisee against those benchmarks, and whether you're reporting it on an average basis or top quartile, median, bottom quartile, etc. That's essentially what the benchmarks are all about, and it's the defining of what those benchmarks are is going to be different for each franchise network. If you're a service-based franchise, very different if you're a fast food franchise, for example. So yeah, that's essentially what benchmarks are, which you all know. The core sort of ones, and I sort of break benchmarks into 2 sort of segments, the easier ones to measure and the harder ones to measure. But to me, I'd start with the ideal list of what are the key benchmarks that really drive the franchisee businesses in your network. What do those numbers look like for successful franchisees? If you break that in then to 2 lists, the easy one, of course, is sales. Everyone measures sales. Most of you would measure gross margin, labor as a percentage of revenue, rent as a percentage of revenue, profit as a percentage of revenue. They're the easy ones, mainly because they're all driven essentially from the financials. And of course, everyone in business has to run financials, and ideally all businesses should be looking at their financials at least monthly. But at the very worst, at least quarterly, when they've got to lodge their BASs, their numbers should be there. So they're the simple ones, and every franchise network should be benchmarking at least against those simple benchmarks. The more complex benchmarks, for those more mature franchise networks, we'd be starting to look at different things like lead quote conversions, occupancy capacity, maybe store traffic, equipment utilization, member client retention, all those sort of different ones, which a lot of that information isn't within the financial reporting. So you're going to need some sort of other system to be recording all those. And that's, then you work out how you're going to get that information, and how your franchisees are going to get that information. some of you on this call will have those systems already in place. Others won't. So maybe a starting point, Bruce.
Yeah, that's a good starting. And I guess in terms of those things, there's a use of technology and how that plays into this as well, isn't there? So some systems have pretty complex systems that drag, straight out of their financials, real-time dashboards, things like Power BI and stuff like that. But I guess you don't have to have the newest and best tech to still have some pretty good benchmarking. It's one of the biggest challenges, and I'm sure Dave will get into this, is actually getting the data from the franchisees is not always readily available. And, if systems, particularly older systems, often don't have the ability to get the data from the franchisees. And so whilst the benchmarking is critical, trying to help grow and develop your system, sometimes it's not always available. So that's, newer systems get the advantage of being able to mandate particular technologies used, whereas older systems, that wasn't so much the case. And Dave, what about prospects? What sort of things are they looking for?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of advertising that I see out there is to be your own boss, and a lot of franchise systems forget that they're actually selling a business. So these key metrics and benchmarks actually they form a fundamental piece that attracts good, strong, qualified leads, because people are shopping for a business. They're shopping for essentially, what is this going to return? So it's not as if we're asking to put up your sales figures or anything like that, but it could be, for example, 70% of our franchisees are multi-unit franchisees. Like, that shows that gives a storyline of success. Or one of our clients are using how their franchisee tenure is 26 years. Like, that's an incredible statistic to put out there, and it shows confidence. So it's not just about sales figures or COGS. Benchmarks can be other fundamental figures that Luke was chatting about earlier.
So cool. And then I guess benchmarking compared to projections. How does that play out, Luke? Is that
well, the reality, the benchmarks are actual data. So how's your network actually performed? Whereas a projection is a forward-looking forecast, and we all know some forecasts are right, some are wrong. We may forecast based off what we think the benchmarks have been, but at the end of the day, the benchmarks are actually what's been achieved in the network, which is why they're so much more powerful. This is what we actually have done, not this is what we plan to do.
And what about spreads? So obviously, if there's a big spread, the average might be a bit misleading. How does that play out? What does the spread say about the network?
Well, I think that the problem is that there are some franchise networks where the top performers are, miles ahead of everyone else. They've won a big national account. They're turning over almost, like, I think there's a franchise in the US where the top two turn over almost more than the rest of the franchise network combined. So when you start averaging out the average revenue figures, for example, and you use those top two that just are so much further apart, it just gives a really distorted view. Whereas if you're looking at the top quarter of how they're performing, and then you look at the middle, the median, and then you look at the bottom quarter, you can really start to see that what's achievable in the middle. The low performers is really more for the franchise network. How do we get those bottom 25% performing better and lifting them up? Because we're all better. The less spread we've got, the stronger we are as a franchise network, where everyone's performing really well or more consistently as a brand. So that's why I think comparing people to the different quartiles is important. They can sort of see where they fit, and then you can work on those areas. And if you measure those quartiles in the different sort of benchmark areas, so I might be really good at revenue, but my percentage of staffing, as a percentage of that revenue is way too high. So I may be, turning over good money, but I'm spending it all on staff because I'm not managing my roster very well, for example. So it allows for the franchise also help support their franchisees and say, listen, what are we doing about the staffing, for example, in that one?
Yeah.
It's also another data layer to put over that quartile is also, I only had the discussion this morning with a network that has 600 franchisees, and they were talking about how do we report on this. And as Luke said, we've, instead of showing all of the averages of each state and store and everything like that, there's quite a number of different factors to overlay. You've got tier 1 sites as well. So you might be in the middle quartile, but you're in a tier 1 site. What's the problem there? How do we get this tier 1 site up into a top tier, into the top quartile of performance and benchmarks? That maybe the franchisee is just not the right person for that site to drive it. So there's a number of different data points that you can actually pop over those quartiles, which is really, really important.
Yeah, 100%. And some of the systems that do this specifically, you can group like your different franchisees into those different groups, whether that's region, whether it's, a high performance site that's got a lot different fit out, or, it's a premier site, for example, comparing all those sites to the other ones that have got the same sort of setups. You might have micro stores, all sorts of different things. And so you can sort of group, if you've got enough volume, you can sort of group into those different areas.
So Dave, just in terms of prospects and franchisees, do you get many questions around this and about, the financial data? Like obviously the quality of the people coming through now, the information they can get, the questions they can ask is a lot more. There's a lot more detail that people are going into, because of the research they're doing, particularly with AI. So is this something that's coming up a bit in the recruitment business?
It's the first question that gets asked. We my salesperson Taylor, we catch up 3 times a week and we go through, okay, what are the hurdles, what's the pipeline, what's stopping people from progressing, and we always review questions that are being asked. People are looking for those sales figures and performance figures really, really early on in the piece. I'm all about, hey, get them vetted first, get an NDA in place, and then let's present the business to them so that they can do their due diligence. But it is super important that you know your numbers inside out. Previously, we'd worked with a brand and they're providing premium quality protein, and the knock-on factor was that they're only a small network and their COGS were in excess of 41%. And typical hospitality people who are researching brands are like, hang on a second, this brand over here has 36% or 34% COGS. So people are asking those questions. What's going on? Are they taking rebates? What is it? No, there's no rebates. It's just a higher quality protein that they're providing. So prospects are coming in well educated, understanding what benchmarks are actually happening industry-wise, not business to business, but industry-wise. And if you're not falling within those benchmarks, they have serious questions for that. So that's what we're finding from a recruitment point of view.
So Luke Martin, what about you? You've obviously at Silverfridge now, but what about previously? Is that you're finding that people are more educated and asking specific questions from benchmarking data?
Yeah. Excuse me. Actually, so the 10 years I've been in franchising, from 10 years ago when it was more of a warm, fuzzy, like Dave mentioned earlier, be your own boss sort of thing. It's now that they're more educated. There's more options and more availability out there, and they want tangible information. So whether it's financial data or it's specific to the actual business, like the operational processes or the marketing itself, they're a lot more informed. There's a lot more information out there. So that data to be either readily available as soon as possible, or as Dave says, you need to know your numbers so when those questions get asked, you're able to convey in a way that, we have it available, you just need to do this 1 or 2 things, or you're able to convey it in a way that makes it tangible for them. Yeah.
And Simon, as a franchisee of Fast Signs, I know that there's a lot of data available, and they use Profit Keeper as their in the US and I think in the UK as well. So are you seeing similar things in Australia when you're talking to potential franchisees for Sinewave But
Well, the potential franchisees seem to tend to go straight for the bottom line, like net profit, which is really difficult because our franchisees are independently owned and operated, and they don't like paying any more tax than anyone else. So, the gross profit margin is usually how I answer the question. But, every different sign company will have, report it differently. They might have their super fund owning their premises and they're pumping it all through there to have no tax at all, sort of thing. So that net profit figure, when they're always going straight for that, they are asking these questions, but I can't give them. I'll say, look, if you run your operation properly, you're going to have these sorts of up margins and you're going to have these sorts of profitability, but you can't, and they really want to get specific. And it's like, well, how are you going to run your business? Are you going to pay yourself a salary, or are you going to pay, yourself dividends at the end of the day?
Yeah. There's lots of, so, Dave, I might move to the next one. Or Luke, are we going?
Yeah, it's a good segue, Simon's comment. Every franchisee will run a business, potentially in different structures. Some might take dividends, some might pay wages, and that will impact some of the benchmarking to some extent. I think systems like Profit Keeper will, map a franchisee's chart of accounts to the actual benchmarking chart of accounts, if that makes sense. And no matter how they're doing it in their own chart of accounts, they'll have to map it across to the centralized view. So whether that's drawings get mapped to wages as much as wages get mapped to wages, if that makes sense, to try to get benchmarking as close to apples as you can get. The other thing is with benchmarking is you're going to get these exceptions because they'll stand out. If someone's paying, above market rent because their self-managed fund owns their property, well, there's rules within that anyway, but at the end of the day, you're going to see that, at least you can sort of explain it as to why their rent's so much more expensive potentially than someone who's at a comparable site.
Or the opposite, Luke, they're not paying themselves anything into their super fund.
Well, and that's the thing about benchmarking as well, where potentially some of the compliance components could be benchmarked that protects the brand as well. If we're seeing inconsistencies in superannuation, say, as a percentage of wages, or we're seeing potentially bringing in some balance sheet items like superannuation payable, for example, we might be able to pick up on some of those things and get out in front of it before it becomes an issue. And we've all seen in the news cycle, with wage theft and things like that, we need to protect the brand, and identifying some of those things through benchmarking is definitely possible. But overall, and we look at 80-20 rule, most will be doing things properly. We want to start at least with a chart of accounts that's pretty consistent. But as much as you tell franchisees this is our standard chart of accounts, and Sinewave is no exception to this, that people will still do weird and wonderful things with their chart of accounts because you simply just can't lock it down. They can do whatever they want. They can add. They might have their accountant might want it done in a certain way, and they'll just change it and do things like that, which is why ultimately when you get the data in for your benchmarking, you may want to map it to a known chart of accounts at that point in the journey. Like what to measure, I sort of covered off to some extent. Like it really depends on your business and what makes it successful franchise. The how often I would be reporting this, as I said, every business should be looking at their numbers at least once a month. And my general rule is by the 10th of the month, you should be able to look at your financial reports. That in theory then means that we should be able to benchmark at that point. Now, not all franchises and not all franchisees are made the same, but at the very least, most businesses have to lodge a BAS, quarterly. So quarterly benchmarking at a minimum, I think. Once again, it depends on the maturity of your franchise and your franchisees as to what you require and how you obtain that information. Most franchise agreements would have some sort of financial reporting built into what they have to provide. It's just whether you ask for it and get that information and how you have to collate it, whether they fill in a form, whether they just provide their P&L balance sheet or just their P&L, or whether they're putting it into a proper system that actually collates all that information and and also shares it in a certain way. And some franchise networks will share a lot more information than others. So that depends on, what your agreements are and how that all works. But at least at a de-identified level, how they're performing against the network, to me, is definitely possible. Cloud systems make things a whole lot easier these days to get the information and the tools to collate it.
Well, it's interesting, Luke. I don't know if anyone on the call uses like Power BI or Spotlight Multi or Profit Keeper, but yeah, there's obviously some tools around that you can get a lot of dashboards on your phone and real-time data. I don't know if Steve from Flip Out's on the call, but I know he's got their system. They've got a lot of data. Is that you, Steve?
Yes, Bruce. Yeah.
Yeah, you get a lot of data, don't you?
Yeah, we continue to update. We started in about 2018, but we've just had a refresh going in about transaction numbers, transaction values, and we do segment 3 different levels of our product from tier 1, 2, and 3. So we're benchmarking like for like. Wouldn't say it's the end game by the way of reporting, but you can do it in the lift. You can say, okay, we had this many transactions, and when you're looking at this every day, within a month to 8 weeks, you really understand what will turn the dial in your business. And for us, it's transactions. So if we want a record day, we need 12 or 15,000 transactions in the given day. And the franchise partners get this report at just after 9 o'clock every morning. So about transactional values, and we're just updating because this social media is something to try and measure, right? So we're really putting a lot of effort in after our managers conference to give them meaningful information around what was spent in the social media platforms, how many impressions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, they will have a thermometer if they're looking at it every day. But the disappointing thing, Bruce, is that not many more than half the people use this technology. They want to sit there, whatever, make some excuses. I said, some of those you would consider obsolete now, right? So, but I think the other benchmarking, which we're just doing, Bruce, with Fordham's, is around manageable expenses, right? Your franchise fees are your franchise fees, your rent's your rent. So what manageable expenses can your managers be accountable for? One is wages. If you leave your heating on in 2,000 square meters or you're cooling on every night, well, that's going to blow that to pieces. So we haven't quite got to the finish line, and everything you've explained about challenges with franchisees, but we're getting one chart of accounts. It's been hard work. It hasn't been easy. There's a lot of back and whatever, but that's a little bit about our system.
Yeah, and obviously when you've got the data, it allows you to be able to have meaningful conversations with the franchisees about their performance and coaching and stuff like that.
I think one thing, Bruce, that's really stood out, and the question I've just got written down to ask the people on the call is that how do we measure the performance against centres when there's some people that aren't in their businesses. They've got a good businesses, they don't want to drive it, they're happy with their profits, but they're probably leaving 300 or 400 behind. And that's a challenge for us, because we can clearly see the comparison for those who get in and get stuck into their business are outperforming. And the big one for us is like for like as well. Like, what are we doing? The network doesn't want to see us, just growing our brand by pure numbers, but the first and foremost is what we are like for like. And we find some challenges there. And again, those who are stuck into their business. But you do have some tougher months. Like, we've had a good run, but February, March, we gave a lot back in the financial year. So our benchmark was 12% improvement on the previous year. My question would be, well, is that a bit too harsh? Asking a bit too much? We said, well, we're going to get stuck in and have a go at it, and we're going to find out at the end of the year. So we know now, but maybe for those centres that are really thrashing it, is 12% realistic? Maybe not. So what's a like for like for you? Is it 6%? Is it double digits? I'm not sure. Depending on the product, I'd be interested to get some feedback.
I think, Steve, for you, you've got a lot of the new centres, so that they're coming off a low base. So they're going to grow way more than that. It's more the mature ones in the system. So I don't know, Luke or Dave, talking about that, where you've got a real spread of new franchisees compared to ones, like you said, Dave, in the sine wave group, some of them have been there 25 years. So they're not going to get 12% increases.
Yeah, so Luke touched on this earlier, Steve. It's about grouping the data together. So you might have your like for like of your new franchisees. How did their first 12 months, how did they go? And where did they benchmark against the performance of the initial franchisees ramping up from opening? That's going to give you some key insights. Is our opening and onboarding improving? I know that the economy has a play in how disposable income and going out to play centers and all of that has a part in it, but it can help you benchmark your opening performance for those stores, and then it's grouping them based on maturity, where are they at, and that will give you a realistic value. The key thing that I've always probably advised on is you want to take a look at what CPI is for that year, but you want to be almost doubling it. So if you're at 3%, you want to be hitting 6%. 6% growth is what I generally like to say.
I like the CPI piece. If you're doubling that, if that's fair play and that's good going, well, great. But we may have been a little aggressive. We're going really well till Christmas, until we got to February and it was hot and no rain and there was a bit of ultra in the pocket for mum and dad. But we got stuck in, and some probably 1/3 or getting close to 50% achieved the double digits, and some did very poorly, and most, if they weren't getting an increase, it was relatively flat. Which is probably to be expected.
Yeah, and that can funnel down into a whole lot of different rabbit holes that conversations can branch off into, which is, how is the marketing performing? How is how's the traffic that's being driven into the location performing? It's quite a lot of triggers. But if you've got a baseline data set for the maturity of the brand of each one of the locations, you can overlay that against each other, and that gives you realistic growth patterns.
Dave, do you want to move to the next slide? Is that you've sort of touched on that last? Or Luke, have you got anything else in terms of platforms or?
No, I just think it needs to be the platform that works for where your franchise is at now. And at least if you're starting, even if it's manual, people scanning in a P&L or balance sheet for now, and you're just collating it in a spreadsheet, at least if you're doing that as a minimum, that's still better than doing nothing. And as it matures along the journey and you start putting in better systems, better quality systems, and all those things that make it easier for everyone, then I think, there are systems that just do this and just also deliver with your portals and all the bits and pieces and do it all in one system. It just really depends on where you're at as a franchise.
There's one before we just move on, Bruce. There's one example that I do like to talk about where I was doing a bit of work with a brand that a significant portion of their business was done through the delivery platforms. And I had asked them whether they had broken out the financial performance based on this large segment being delivery over here. And when we actually done the piece of work and applied the appropriate benchmarks to that, we found that they were losing money on their delivery sales. All it was doing was just propping up brand and developing brand awareness, which then led them into, okay, we've got to look at potentially increasing our price online for these products if we're serious about making money. So my point being is that each business out there can take a look at their products or their different segments and understand what is the true performance of each one of them. Like that's going into the micro of benchmarking, but it's an important thing to actually run in your business.
Cool. So there we go. So this is you, Dave.
Yep.
Do you want me to share this? Do you want me to change this? You talk to these points, or you want me to?
I can talk to the points and then I'll just show an example ROI template at the end. I think the most important, and we've got to understand when we take franchise recruitment back, a lot of people coming into the business may not be financially savvy. they may not have good financial acumen with them, and then they're reliant on advisors, they're reliant on external people who potentially know nothing about your brand. And this is where I see a major downfall with a lot of brands that I sit down and do a bit of consulting work with, is that they're not forthcoming with figures. And then what ends up happening is people go off, they have to incur costs, they have to sit down and try and understand a disclosure document, which they can't make sense of. And it ends up hurting your sales process. So I'm all for one for creating I call it an ROI template as opposed to a cash flow template. But what stuff that belongs in there is, you know, the overall entry costs. I see it time and time again where franchisors will advertise the minimum cost of getting in. Doesn't include the cost of going to see professional advisors, setting up their entities, estimated working capital, and that ends up leading to poor leads coming in because they aren't financially qualified for the business. You need to understand what is the total estimated startup cost of the business, because then that's going to help in the return on investment calculation as well. You've got to have your benchmark ranges in place, because this is going to help people to understand, okay, I just need to pick a figure between 20% and 25%, and it just automatically calculates out for me. It's simple. Earning representation rules, again, this goes back into, if it's factual, if it's last year performance and you can back it up with P&Ls, it's not a representation and you can legally show those numbers. You don't have to say which site it came from or which location, but I always strongly recommend that you provide earning potential, or revenue from last financial year, because they need to be able to work towards realistic figures that's happening within your network. If people work towards a figure that is not being achieved and they end up coming in, you're going to have a very dissatisfied franchisee very quickly. It's better to be upfront and transparent with these kind of figures from the get-go, and it helps with the planning of this return on investment calculator. So when to introduce it? I'm a big believer. It's the first question we get asked all the time. Get the paperwork out of the way, the application. Make sure you're talking to the right person first. Did they meet the criteria of the brand? Get them signed over an NDA, and then get the information in front of them. That's when they are interested. They need financial questions answered relatively quickly at that stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen now. Bruce, don't stress. I'll do it here. Present now.
Stop.
No, that's okay. I'll just jump in. Can everybody see this? Yep, excellent. So this is just a generic template that we use when we work with brands. And mentioning earlier, it's got all the tabs down the bottom. You don't need to have financial acumen to fill in this forecast. Basically, we go with a brand, and so for example, shop fit, we might go labor and a range which is 200 to 300,000. And they just simply insert a figure here, and it calculates down here. So they are picking from ranges. So stuff that you include in the establishment costs is obviously the shop fit, the equipment, the security deposits. If they need to have 3 months rent up front, they need to have that cash. That's got to be also calculated as well. Any other additional funds, and then the other payments being the franchise fee, the training fee, opening, promotion, legals, etc., etc. This then flows over into a loan repayment schedule. As we all understand, if they've got a loan on the business, the interest is a P&L expense, so we'll carry that over into the P&L, and then the capital repayment is worked down from there. So they can very simply just put in an interest rate here and the length of the term of the loan, and it calculates out all of this here. They don't have to do any work. They just basically punch in figures. The network performance, we never disclose which site is doing what. We just have a code for each site and we put it up. And this allows us in the recruitment phase to work towards figures. Now, if you're a smaller network, it's probably harder to work with quartiles. So you could probably list, your 10 or 15 locations. But if you're a larger network, like I was chatting to this morning with 600 franchisees, they've got to look at their top, mid, bottom, and they've got to work on the ranges within that as well. And obviously, as franchisors, we're hoping to attract people who are going to be attacking that top quarter, because why would we allow them through the process if they're just going to be focused on average? We need them targeting that top. For the yearly forecast inputs, you can see here, this is for a hospitality franchise. I'll increase the size here. But we've got what's the average number of transactions per month. We'll put a range. It could be 2,000 to 3,000, and they can ramp those figures up over the first 12 months. The average transaction value, we are going between 20 and $26 basket size. They can punch that in, and then they can talk about the in-store sales versus delivery, and that will calculate it all out. As you can see, it's really just we're providing them the ranges for each one of the line items that's in the forecast, which is ultimately building out your benchmarks. What's the direct costs? What's the wages? What's the general expense allocation? And then that all populates across into a yearly forecast, which they don't have to calculate themselves. It just basically multiplies it all out, and it takes into account earlier, what I was saying to you, Steve, is CPI growth. So as long as sales growth is outperforming CPI growth, you should be seeing a stronger return on the bottom line. So we've got that already calculated in that it automatically generates. And then we've got the return on investment. So they've invested an initial amount of 30,000 up here, the running costs of the business. This is when it's going to return year 3.5 out of 5 years. That's a good return. So it's really, really important that they are able to go away understanding the story, the financial story of your business, because instead of just them taking a disclosure document to their accountant and saying, hey, build a financial model that's based on this, it's going to take a lot of time, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. But a document like this or a file like this really helps them understand the business first and foremost. And as operators, we want them to understand the operational levers of the business. And then secondly, it doesn't put a huge hurdle or financial cost in front of them to get under the hood of the financial model of the business. And it's done pretty early in the piece.
So, Dave, obviously the code mandates now that there's a reasonable
return
on investment, and so something. But I know that having seen lots of different systems that haven't really gone into detail like you've done when they've set their franchise systems up. So, are you still seeing people that come in and that they franchise their business, but they really don't know how long it's going to take to get that the franchisees will get a return on investment? Is that
yes, there is because they are not. When I drilled down into that question, it is, we don't want to be across that because they're afraid of employment obligations and then liability onto the franchisor and stuff like that. So they actually step away from it. Yeah. And what you end up finding is that their model, their performance from a unit level is all over the place because of not allocating the right expenses, or they're not understanding the true levers of the business. So, for example, if it's in hospitality, go back to hospitality, we operate COGS at 32, but you're up at 38. Do we have too much wastage? Are we actually putting on too many toppings on our pizza? What is it that you can't truly go by performance? And this is where we need them at. So it's really, really important to have those figures. If you are serious about
that one there was obviously a low entry, the one you were talking about, and then we've got a few people on the call that are home-based services, or man in a van, or different, which is very different from ones that are
hugely.
Steve's one that flip out centers are pretty big, but I guess probably the ones that springs to mind, and it's a personal experience around the size of the franchise location and getting the model right, because massive differences between the footprint and the costs of opening. So if franchisors are, running a premises that's normally 150 square meters or 200 square meters, and then they decide because the rent fits into the template, and go, well, you rent 70 grand a year, that fits within the model, but we found you a site that's 500 square meters. It's double, more than double.
And then the consideration is that, okay, well, you've got to fit out a lot of that 500 square meters. That's going to increase the initial investment. Is there a realistic return? Are you going to increase client numbers? Probably not. If they've done their territory mapping similar, they're probably going to have the same sort of client visitation. But if you've got a higher investment that you've got to pay down just because you're matching rent numbers, that's not the right way to go. You'll end up with a very dissatisfied franchisee, because realistically, they're never going to pay down the initial investment.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's got any questions around Dave's template or model, or if they're using similar things in the business when they're talking to people. Is that, the return on investment calculator? Is that something that people are doing? I don't know, Luke or Steve or Simon, people that haven't got the camera on. Sarah, have you got? Sarah's obviously.
Sarah's very good at this.
She has
very good at this.
Microphone that's working.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Yay. Well, your microphone's on my laptop, my headphones are on my ears. I don't know. I'm having a sound problem. Yes. So yes, we do return on investment, but we're quite different because we hold all the cash. So we know exactly what they're turning over. We know exactly where it's coming from. We know all of their expenses. We push their expenses into zero. So and then we do an annual review of their zero and make sure that they are using our chart of accounts. So we'll have all of their P&Ls for the last financial year sorted by the end of this month. And then we'll be able to go through and benchmark everybody across the board and give Dave updated numbers and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're right on top of it. We did try, so we use Fathom within a different part of our business to sort of trying to aggregate. We've got a number of different companies, and we did present to our franchisees to say, would you be interested in signing up to Fathom, so that then at any particular time they can benchmark themselves against the rest of the network, and they weren't that keen. But we do share with them where they sit from a revenue perspective. So at the end of the financial year, we send out a list of everybody's revenue without names, just with numbers, and then we email each of them individually and say, this is your rank, this is where you sit. So, which is valuable. A lot of them find it valuable just because they think they're doing really well, but they don't know until we tell them that actually, no, you're in the middle or you're at the bottom. So most people know it's at the top.
It is interesting that they're not keen, isn't it? I think that's not that uncommon, that what we see as well, that for whatever reason they don't want to share. Like it's, I know we use the example of Baker's Delight a bit because they're very transparent in terms of numbers between franchisees as between, so they can all see. I know with that as a gold standard, like to see where people are in all different levels.
I think if I was a franchisee, I'd want to know. I'd want to know where I sat and where the rest of my peers are, and then I'd want to find out who's above me so that I can go and talk to them and find out what they're doing different to what I'm doing so that I can better my business. But, someone mentioned before, you've got franchisees that they're ridiculously happy, but they're in the bottom third and they're so happy. So they don't want to do more. They're just happy. So it makes a challenge. Yeah.
Dave, I can ask more people questions, but we probably need to we've got a couple more slides to go. So I don't know, is this
I can talk to this because it's so when you take a look at the persona of your franchisee, and some franchise networks might be seeking high achieving people who hit the ground quickly, who are focused on a return on investment. The marketing performance goes out differently. So for a person like that, you might talk about what Steve was saying earlier. You know, we achieved a 12% year-on-year growth. And that then instantly triggers hang on a second, that's a good USP. This business hit a 12% year-on-year growth last year. And that's a good top of the line funnel hook that gets them to go, oh, what's this about? If you're more of a collaborative, family orientated, where we'll sit around and sing Kumbaya, that's a different hook that you're going to lead with. So it might be, you know, the average tenure of our franchisee is 18 years. Or, you know, there's multiple different franchisees that have numerous locations because they've been with us for so long. And those hooks and those USPs, which are technically benchmarks, you are going out to create that top of funnel, bang. This is the person who we are interested in, and they will click on it. So it's really, it's important how it actually helps with qualifying your lead or the type of person you actually want to talk to before they even interact with any of your ads out there. So really good exercise is to understand all of your benchmarks, but then how can you actually put them into a eye-catching, scroll-stopping hook that is directed straight at the person you want to see it.
So broker and expo conversations, or given we've got an expo on the weekend, we're busily putting materials together.
Yep, frantically. You know, for example, we've got Computer Explorers, Bruce, and, you know, we just had a teacher strike down in Melbourne. You know, there's a lot of teachers who are very upset at this moment in time. They've been overlooked, and our prime candidate for Computer Explorers are teachers. So, like, we can come up with all sorts of, you know, performance-based targeting that goes, you know, you're sick of slaving away over here, you may as well be doing it here. So it's understanding who your persona is and then hitting them with the messaging that you know that they want to hear. It's very important.
Yeah, so which I guess a lot of brands don't do that initial piece, do they? And surveying their franchisees and understanding the demographic of each of the franchisees, and then linking that across to the performance of the franchisees and going, what sort of people are performing well in my network? What are the qualities and characteristics of those people? And that's like, I know we were talking benchmarking predominantly around financial benchmarking, but benchmarking of other skills and qualities is also just as important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also understanding who are the buyers in the marketplace at this moment in time. So, for example, I was talking to a hospitality brand there last week, and I was reviewing all of their collateral, and all of their imagery was very young white female. And when we actually spoke about their network were male Indians, and like you're not going to grab the attention. You're not going to grab their attention because you've completely missed the point of building a persona around. And it just so happens it's in hospitality, where the Indian community are the most active in purchasing in the hospitality industry now at this moment in time. So you'd be foolish to go against the flow of it.
I don't know, Matt, if you're available, because obviously in Spud Bar there's lots of your target audience is of that demographic, and so is there any benchmarking you've done?
Well, just like Dave was saying, then it's absolutely right that you know, we've got to talk to our tribe, we've got to talk to our people, and we've just done some testimonial videos that showcase our experience and our quality of franchisee within our network, and it's showcasing who they are and their background and their journey to Australia, coming over as a student, becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a business owner, and becoming a multi-site owner. And so a lot of people, if we're talking about our audience, we are targeting, it's a lot of trust from within. And if they can get trust from, okay, they can see themselves also doing this and also talk to someone who's been on their same journey, then that gives them confidence. And sometimes there's a different way of looking at things for different demographics, but reaching out and being able to talk to them in their own in a certain way really does back up the conversation. So yeah, like for example, their journey, being able to come on board, become multi-site owners, be able to grow in the business, to be in the network for 5+ years, 7 years. So they've been through franchise agreement renewals, they've been through lease renewals, so it shows confidence and loyalty and trust in the brand. Now we're basically pushing upwards now from where we have been over the last 10 years. Like I joined last year, and we've on a very big growth push over the next couple of years. So it is that kind of chicken or the egg. We can showcase where we have been, which isn't where we want to be. So we are, representing where we are going, but also factoring in how we're going to get there with enhancements that we've done over the last 12 months of fixing our foundations. And being able to show that. But it's a journey from our side as well. But it's, having that, I think, reaching out from within our network as well, and having that backup, and having that trust from existing franchisees who put their name to what we do, and they can reach out throughout their networks to bring people on board and introduce them to me. And I then, I have the franchisee as well next to me in conversations to, if I can't answer something, the franchisee is there to have a conversation about it.
Matt, I had lunch yesterday with Simon, the owner of Spud Barber, who, so Simon McNamara was he owned a juice business. He was a juice CEO of Boost Juice. He was also founder of Bounce, but he's also at Grilled, one of the co-founders of Grilled. And so it's got different experiences. And one of the things, which I don't know, Dave, if you benchmarked this, but we talked a lot about the amount of community and getting involved in local community and amount spend on marketing, local area marketing, compared to marketing spend at the franchisor level, and how that's benchmarked and expectations around spending. And it was he had interesting insights around, looking at what like how much should the marketing spend be and how much should the local area, like those two things. Is that something you had to benchmark?
Yeah, it's very interesting, because having been an ex-franchisor myself, and with a marketing fund, people expect that, okay, well, I'm paying you a marketing levy, you should do everything for me. One of the ways I tackled it was quite interesting. I actually jumped onto the government side for business, and the recommended percentage of marketing spend for a small business is up to 10%. So we were able to, take that benchmark from the Australian government to then sit down with franchisees and go, okay, well, you're putting 2% into a marketing fund, and there's not even 1% being spent by yourself on top of that. How do you expect performance to take place? The recommendation is you should be hitting about 10% of your revenue should be going towards marketing.
And it's just how that's split up, isn't it? Yeah.
It creates that split, that it's not you forcing that on them, but you're kind of highlighting, hang on a second, you're actually not generating anything locally. And we benchmarked franchisees who were, you can't put a financial figure to it, but they're out and about and they're going to the local footy club. It's their time building those network and those relationships, and it could be at the Chamber of Commerce. So we used to have, okay, well, this franchisee is part of X amount of communities. Now take a look at their sales performance, because they are getting a huge referral network in from that.
Yeah, so the conversation we were having yesterday, Dave, was around if the Indian community aren't necessarily the ones who are going to roll up at the footy club. So should we be spending money on different things should we spending more money on social media and less money on sponsoring the footy club, because to get the return on investment
Well, I think the way franchising is going nowadays, Bruce, is that the real point of difference now is going to come down to brand and systems, because people are looking to leverage from a brand, because it's really, really hard to get your brand up to the levels of the established players in the market unless you've got a significant marketing budget behind you. And then do you have really slick and smooth operating systems that ultimately deliver a profit for the franchisee? So getting franchisees who are aligned to the brand, or understanding who your buyer is. If you need people who are community focused and have that ability to get out and talk the talk, well, then you need to build that into persona of who you're marketing to, because then you're not wasting spend on unqualified leads. You're actually saying, here's who we're looking for. Do you like getting out in the community and building a healthier, fitter, whatever suburb? Join us today. That's who we're looking for.
Dave, we've got 2 minutes. You've got 1 minute for this slide, because I've got one after you.
Okay, so this is actually a really important slide, because everybody's tried, and I'm sure Steve and the larger brands out there, the significant investment overall. If you don't have a transparent relationship with lenders, credit they're going to sensitize any sort of ROI template or any sort of sales figure, and they never sensitize them in the favorable way. They sensitize them in underperformance, and I've seen plenty of deals fall over because of that. So it's very important to have a relationship with your lenders, get to know them, catch up with them maybe quarterly to talk about quarterly benchmarking performance. How have we gone? How are we tracking? Where's the improvements, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that it's consistently communicated and it's clean, because then they go, okay, well, this network here is moving. It's not a sunsetting business. It's still sunrise, and there's still plenty of scale and plenty of growth in the horse. And make sure that they are well aware that you control these benchmarks. So going back to Bruce's example of, hey, rent is 70 grand a year, but you're going into a property double the size. The capital investment is going to be through the roof. Are they going to be able to return? So lenders want to actually know all of these key benchmarks within your business, so that it makes the lending part of franchising much easier. And they see that you are on top of all of this.
Okay, I'm going to skip down here. Thank you. Firstly, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Luke. And thank you, everyone, for participating. We are running a webinar in a couple of months, so managing risk and protecting your business. In that webinar, we're going to talk unsexy things like wills and estate planning, but also shareholders agreements and other things you can do to manage the risk in your business. If anyone, I'm conscious that it is 1 minute past 12, so we didn't get it. If there's other questions that you didn't get to ask, I'm happy to stay on. We will stop the recording, Tanya. We've got the one. So if people want to go, that's fine. But Dave and Luke and I'll be on for another couple of minutes if you want to ask other questions.